The glass of milk was still warm when Lucas Perry vanished in the town of Ottumwa, Iowa, population 24,100. That May morning in 1962 arrived with gentle sunlight and the distant sound of trains echoing from the station to the east, the familiar noise of a peaceful Midwestern town. The Perry family's neighbor, Ruth Ellison, waved through her kitchen window as the 6-year-old boy pedaled his small red bicycle around Jefferson Park, the bike he had received for his birthday the previous week. Lucas was wearing the green striped shirt his mother had just ironed, holding a half-eaten sandwich as he circled the iron fence leading to the main road. At the edge of the park, a man in a baseball cap leaned against a light blue Ford Fairlane, his eyes following the boy as he disappeared behind a row of maples. What happened in the next 47 minutes would haunt Ottumwa for more than half a century. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. In the spring of 1962, Ottumwa, a small town along the Des Moines River in Iowa, still lived in the relaxed rhythm of early 1960s America, where doors were rarely locked, children rode their bikes from morning until night without supervision, and everyone was certain that evil only existed in big cities hundreds of miles away. Back then, Midwesterners still held the simple belief that the community would always protect one another, that the straight roads cutting through endless cornfields could never harbor danger. In the midst of that peaceful atmosphere was the Perry family. Donald, the father, who worked shifts at the John Deere plant, a quiet man but always patient when listening to his 2 sons' stories. Margaret, the mother who worked at the town library, with a habit of placing her hand on her children's shoulders when speaking as a way to convey warmth. Evan, the lively 8-year-old brother, a bit mischievous but polite, and Lucas, 6 years old, smaller than his peers, but quick-witted, with brown eyes always wide open, as if discovering every little thing in the world around him. Lucas especially loved trains and was fascinated most by the mornings when he could hear the train whistles echoing from the Ottumwa station to the east of town. For him, it was the sound of a vast world he had yet to reach. On the morning of May 14, 1962, nothing foretold that it would be different. A light breeze blew through the rows of maples, leaves still wet with overnight dew. The radio in the kitchen played the weather report and some country music. Margaret prepared breakfast while Donald joked that today would be a beautiful day for the 2 boys to get some exercise outside. Lucas begged to ride his bike to Jefferson Park, just a few blocks from home, where he and Evan often played under the shade of old oak trees. Margaret hesitated briefly, a fleeting premonition passing through her mind before vanishing as she looked out at the street. A peaceful morning like any other. She allowed it, reminding the 2 boys to stay close together. As the brothers prepared to leave, Evan ran back inside to find his rubber ball, leaving Lucas waiting alone on the curb. And it was at that moment that a small detail appeared, one that shifted the morning's atmosphere by a beat. A light blue Ford Fairlane parked not far away, with the shadow of a man leaning against the car door, his baseball cap shading nearly half his face. The man did not smile or wave, even though his gaze passed over Lucas and Margaret. Margaret paused for a second, an uneasy feeling crawling up her spine, but then she reassured herself he was probably just a stranger passing through town. She didn't want to become an overly cautious parent when most neighbors never worried about such things. While Evan was still rummaging inside the house, Lucas stood at the gate, hands gripping the bicycle handlebars, eyes fixed on the Fairlane, as if trying to figure out who the man was. A breeze carried the scent of damp earth, and a faint metallic sound rang out as the car door opened. The man leaned out, his voice low and soft, making it hard to discern any emotion. "Lucas, could you come over here for a second?" The familiar tone made Lucas hesitate briefly. He took a step back, turning to call for Evan. But in that short moment, the man stepped out, blocking the view from the main road. No one knows exactly what happened in the seconds that followed. A quick movement, an arm closing in, a car door shutting quietly without drawing attention. When Evan returned just a few minutes later, The blue car had completely vanished from the corner, and Lucas had vanished with it. Evan looked around in confusion, thinking Lucas had just wandered off somewhere. But when he saw his brother's bicycle abandoned by the fence, standing oddly upright, he panicked and called Lucas's name until his voice grew hoarse. With no response, Evan tugged at Margaret's shirt, gasping through tears. Margaret ran to Jefferson Park, shouting her son's name until her voice was raw, while Donald drove around the streets like a man possessed. Neighbors heard the cries and poured out into the streets, splitting up to search every backyard and alley. Jefferson Park was thoroughly searched. Every tree trunk and bush. Some people said they saw a blue car speeding toward Highway 34, but no one was certain. The first minutes passed heavily, with despair as if someone were strangling the entire small town. And at exactly 10:52 a.m. that morning, with trembling hands and a broken voice, Donald Perry picked up the phone and called the Ottumwa Police Department, reporting that his 6-year-old son had disappeared. When Donald Perry's call was transferred to the Ottumwa Police Department switchboard at 10:52 a.m., the duty officer initially logged it as a child wandering case, a child possibly lost in the neighborhood, something not uncommon in Ottumwa during the 1960s. The missing persons procedures at the time were still vague. No Amber Alert system, no standard response in the critical first hours, and most officers still held the mindset that children usually returned home on their own after a few hours. However, it was the tone of Donald's voice, choked, halting, unable to form complete sentences, that made the duty officer hesitate and decide to transfer the call to Sergeant Howard Latham, the most senior officer on the morning shift that day. Latham listened to Donald's story, which lasted less than a minute, but it was enough for him to sense something unusual. Lucas was not the type of child who wandered off randomly, and the time he had been missing was already too long for a typical wandering case. Latham immediately asked, "Was any of the boy's belongings left at the scene?" Donald replied through labored breathing that Lucas's bicycle was still by the park fence, but Lucas was nowhere to be seen. An alarm went off in Latham's mind. 6-year-olds rarely abandon their bicycles, especially when no friends or family were with them. Just minutes after the call, the first patrol car arrived at the Perry home, where Margaret was trembling while clutching a shawl, her eyes red from crying, and Evan stood huddled behind his mother, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. The two officers asked Evan the simplest questions possible. Did he see Lucas leave the park? Was there anyone strange there? Was there anything unusual in how Lucas reacted? Evan, still in shock, stammered that there was a blue car parked near the playground and a man standing beside it. He repeated, "He didn't smile, he was looking at us like he was waiting for something." Latham arrived at the scene shortly after, and with just a quick glance, understood that this was no longer a case of a lost child. The bicycle had been left neatly against the iron fence, as if Lucas had been suddenly separated from it. There were no footprints running away, no trampled grass trails, no signs that the boy had left voluntarily. A few fresh tire tracks pointed straight toward the main road, but not clear enough to identify the vehicle type. The entire scene lacked the chaos typical of a panicked lost child. It was unnaturally quiet, as if the boy had been lifted off the ground. Latham made the first critical decision: upgrade the case from missing juvenile to possible child abduction. In 1962, this was far from common. Police would be seen as overly sensitive or making a big deal if they issued an abduction alert too soon. But Latham knew time was the enemy in every missing child case. He ordered the switchboard to issue an internal alert immediately, sending a preliminary description of Lucas and the circumstances of his disappearance to all units in the city, then expanding to neighboring counties. Less than 30 minutes later, police radios across Wapello County broadcast the description of Lucas: male, 6 years old, brown hair, green striped shirt, beige shorts, missing from Jefferson Park around 10 a.m. Though the information was still sparse, it was the first signal spreading beyond the neighborhood boundaries. Latham returned to speak with Donald and Margaret to gather more details about habits, personality, places Lucas frequented, any strangers who had approached him. Margaret recalled the moment with the man by the Ford Fairlane, and when she mentioned it, her voice broke completely. It was the first time she could face the terrible possibility she had been trying to deny all morning. Donald, his face pale, leaned against the wall as if he had taken a blow. Latham offered no hypotheses, but he knew the appearance of the blue car, if confirmed, was a key lead. He asked for more detailed descriptions, the car's color, the man's build, the direction the car went. However, Evan's memory was too vague, and Margaret had only glimpsed it, so she couldn't confirm anything definitively. Latham noted in his book, "Car possibly headed toward Highway 34, that brief note would become the initial focus for the entire county's activities that day. To ensure forces in the area were mobilized properly, Latham contacted the switchboard to request a county-wide bulletin, a county-wide alert, for all patrol units on major roads, especially those near the direction of Highway 34 and Route 63. The goal was simple but urgent: determine if a light blue Ford Fairlane was leaving town. In the context of 1962, with rudimentary communication systems, this meant placing trust in the officers on the road, who might spot the car or miss it in the blink of an eye. At 11:28 a.m., just 36 minutes after the missing person report, Latham officially declared the case highly likely to involve criminal activity. No sirens, no specialized vehicles, no modern procedures, just the urgency of people who knew every minute could change a child's fate. The Perry family stood on their front porch, exhausted from fear, watching the departing patrol car. In their eyes, for the first time, the familiar piece of Ottumwa had cracked, and fear crept into every breath. From that moment, no one in the family believed Lucas had simply gotten lost. They understood something far more terrible had just happened to the 6-year-old boy. When the clock passed 11:30 a.m., Sergeant Howard Latham returned to Jefferson Park with 2 other officers, bringing the basic evidence collection kit that the Ottumwa PD had in 1962. Sealable bags, graphite powder, measuring tape, a bulky camera, and a few plaster trays for casting footprints. Jefferson Park was now devoid of children's voices, filled only with hurried footsteps and tense police voices as they asked residents to keep their distance, creating a temporary cordon around the area believed to be where Lucas disappeared. Latham walked slowly, carefully observing the ground, still marked with overnight dew. The grass was barely trampled, indicating no struggle or resistance. Lucas's small bicycle leaned against the fence, as if placed there, not thrown or dropped. This sent a chill down Latham's spine, as it reinforced the theory that the boy had been approached suddenly, with no chance to resist. He pointed, "Don't touch the bicycle. Photograph the entire position." One officer knelt down, measuring the distance from the bicycle to the curb, 3.5 feet. There were no long skid marks, indicating sudden braking, no scraped earth from panic. Nearby, a small patch of dirt beside the gravel path showed faint drag marks, as if a light object had been pulled, or a child's shoes had been turned. Latham ordered plaster casts taken. The drag mark was indistinct, but its depth and scratched surface suggested it appeared around the time of the disappearance. To the right of the bicycle, they found a small shoe print, child-sized, with a rubber sole worn on one side, matching the size Evan described Lucas usually wearing. This footprint pointed toward the road, but vanished after about 2 steps. Its sudden end gave Latham goosebumps. If Lucas had walked away on his own, there would be more footprints. The fact that only a few were visible meant the boy had been lifted off the ground. A few feet away, an officer picked up an unopened soda can, label still fresh, the type of drink Lucas liked but hadn't brought that morning. No clear fingerprints, but its position was off, as if hastily discarded or fallen from someone's pocket. Latham ordered it sealed and marked as evidence #3. As they continued scanning the grass edge near the fence, an officer called out, "Tire tracks." Latham bent down to examine the thin impressions in the soft soil. The tire marks were shallow, indicating the vehicle hadn't stopped long, but they still photographed and measured the distance between the tracks. That distance matched mid-1950s to early 1960s sedans, including the Ford Fairlane. Not enough to confirm, but it strangely aligned with Margaret and Evan's descriptions. While the police worked, an 11-year-old boy witness was brought back to the park by his father at Latham's request. The boy stood huddled behind his father, fingers twisting the hem of his shirt, but when asked, he spoke clearly. "I saw the man wearing a baseball cap. He was standing next to a light blue car. I think he was waiting for someone." Latham asked again about the car's color, and the boy pointed to a nearby toy car to describe the light blue shade. His description matched Evan's more closely than the vague adult accounts from that morning. Latham recorded every detail: baseball cap, leaning posture against the car door, parking direction, witness vantage point. From the accounts of three people, Margaret, Evan, and the 11-year-old boy, Latham began reconstructing Lucas's final movements. The iron fence, the bicycle, the child's footprints, the soda can, the faint drag mark, the suspected car parking spot, all these seemingly scattered details formed a logical path of movement. Lucas standing by his bicycle, looking toward the blue car, a man calling him, the boy taking a few steps forward, being lifted, the car leaving the scene toward the nearest road. Latham noted, high probability, Lucas was placed in the vehicle within 30 seconds. He stood silently for a few seconds, eyes on the road leading out of the park. No sound remained from that moment, only the silent traces on the ground, as if trying to tell their own story. An officer asked, "Sergeant, should we expand the search area?" Latham shook his head slightly. "Not yet. First, secure this entire area. No one enters until the scene is fully photographed." He knew well, one erased trace, one trampled footprint, one disturbed patch of soil could derail the entire investigation. As the last camera clicks recorded each piece of evidence position, Latham sensed something. The scene was unnaturally clean. No struggle, no cries, no running marks. This was unlike any lost child case he had ever known. He looked at the bicycle one more time, then turned to the duty officer, "Seal off the scene." From this moment, Jefferson Park is a restricted area, and in that moment, the inherent peace of Ottumwa was completely torn apart by those small, silent traces that contained a horror no one in the town had ever imagined. Just within 1 hour after Jefferson Park was sealed off, news of the disappearance had spread throughout Ottumwa, and a county-level search force began to mobilize. No longer were there the desperate calls of neighbors shouting Lucas's name as in the morning. Search and rescue was now organized according to the strictest procedures that 1962 could deploy, though still far from modern standards. From the Wapello County headquarters, a large map of central Ottumwa was spread out on the table. Sergeant Latham, along with representatives from the county sheriff's office and the volunteer rescue team, stood around the map, using a red crayon to circle a 5-mile radius from Jefferson Park, then expanding it to 8 miles in the direction of the prevailing wind and natural trails leading out of the residential area. The morning wind was blowing lightly from the southwest, meaning any natural movement by Lucas, if he had walked or slipped, or if there was some noise, could likely have been carried toward the fields and riverside areas. Latham knew that every small movement could be critical in the initial hours. To avoid teams trampling potential evidence, he divided the map into grid search cells, each assigned to a separate group of rescue personnel, police, and volunteers. The groups were instructed to search from the inside out, starting from the center of the park and gradually expanding to trails, fields, residential areas, and then major roads. The county's K-9 unit arrived just before noon. The dogs were trained to track the scent of Lucas's clothing that Margaret had brought to the police. The smell of a young child often mixed with milk, dirt, and light sweat, and to a working dog, that was a strong signature. When one of the K-9 Sess, a German shepherd named Duke, sniffed Lucas's shirt, it immediately lowered its nose to the ground and began following a clear trajectory from the park, across low grass, over a trail into a small dirt road leading toward Highway 34. Duke moved so quickly that its handler had to brace himself to hold it back. But when they reached the area near the intersection of the dirt road and Highway 34, Duke suddenly stopped, raised its head, circled once, and completely lost the scent. It barked softly, trying to pick it up again but couldn't. The handler immediately looked at Latham and shook his head. This was a classic sign the scent had been cut off by the victim being placed in a motor vehicle. This virtually eliminated the hypothesis that Lucas left on his own or got lost. Latham noted it but still ordered an expanded search along the Des Moines River. Since 6-year-olds sometimes follow the sound of flowing water, the boat rescue team launched 2 wooden skiffs into the winding section of the river near Market Street Bridge. The spring current wasn't strong, but was enough to be dangerous if a child fell in. Team members used long poles to probe each section of the bank, calling Lucas's name as it echoed off the rocky shores. From above, patrol teams scanned the riverbanks with binoculars, looking for any sign of clothing, shoes, or floating items. Nothing. No sign. No object reflecting on the water. Just the river flowing steadily, indifferent as if it hadn't swallowed anything. Meanwhile, the northern group swept the abandoned warehouses on the edge of town, wooden buildings once used to store materials for factories, now mostly covered in dust and cobwebs. This was an area where kids often curiously sneaked in to play, so police had to check every bay, every narrow entrance. Every door, wall nook, and attic was illuminated with flashlights. Some warehouses had old, dried adult footprints from who knows when. Volunteers tapped the floors with sticks to check for hollow or loose spots in case of hidden basements, but everything was intact. The fields west of the park were also swept in a line formation. More than 60 volunteers stood 10 feet apart, walking and searching every patch of grass, every low bush, looking under every maple and elm tree. From a distance, Latham watched the search line moving steadily forward like a marching rank. And it was the silence of that scene that sent a chill down his spine. If Lucas had gotten lost, they should have found at least a footprint, a scrap of fabric, or some small sign. But the complete absence of any physical evidence pointed to something more dangerous. Lucas may never have left the park on his own 2 feet. As the search teams continued to cover each grid cell on the map, Latham considered the natural directions a child might move. A 6-year-old would typically run toward areas with noise or light, gas stations, stores, churches, or busy roads. But none of those spots showed any sign of Lucas passing through. No one remembered seeing him walking on the street. No store reported a boy stopping by. Latham stood by the map, marking all the natural routes a child might take. All were dead ends. The only unusual factor was the direction toward Highway 34, the dirt road where Duke lost the scent. As the midday sun began pouring down on the warming pavement, search teams reported back one by one to the temporary command center. Nothing found, no footprints, no fabric scraps or items. Each report was like a door slamming shut, gradually narrowing the hope that Lucas had simply wandered off. By early afternoon, after all search cells within the 8-mile radius had been thoroughly covered, a preliminary conclusion formed. There was no physical evidence proving Lucas left the park on his own. No new trails, no discarded items, no signs of falling or getting lost. All natural search directions were blocked. Only one hypothesis was gaining weight. Lucas had been taken by car, and on the map now heavily marked with red crayon lines, the direction toward Highway 34 was circled more boldly than any other. Like a warning no one wanted to acknowledge, that the trail of the 6-year-old boy had left Ottumwa faster than anyone could realize. As the search radius expanded without yielding any sign of Lucas, Sergeant Latham moved to the next task, establishing an initial suspect list based on the principal who was present near the time of disappearance, who could approach a child without drawing attention, and who had means to leave the area quickly. Those simple but practical criteria were enough to narrow it down to the first 3 individuals brought into focus, 3 people who differed in circumstances, but all appeared during the critical time frame. Suspect A. The young delivery driver for Cloverleaf Dairy, Suspect A, a homeless man often seen at the corner of Market Street, and suspect C, the single man living near Jefferson Park, previously seen driving a car in a color similar to the one described by witnesses. 3 people, 3 stories, 3 separate investigative paths, and each led Latham and his team into a different version of suspicion. Suspect A was Tom Harrington, 27 years old, who drove a milk truck every morning through residential areas, stopping at a few small stores in North Ottumwa. According to his delivery log, Tom was in the area near Jefferson Park from 9:45 to 10:20 that morning. This time frame immediately put him on the suspect list, as it overlapped with when Lucas was still at the park and when the strange man appeared with a light green car. Latham requested Tom come to the police station that same afternoon. Tom entered the interrogation room, looking anxious but not resistant. He was thin, with tousled sandy blonde hair, still carrying the faint smell of milk and sweat on his uniform. When asked the initial questions, Tom answered somewhat hurriedly, but not dishonestly. "I delivered milk to Blake's grocery store. I parked in the back. I didn't go near the park." Latham remained neutral, only asking Tom to describe his route, the time he left the delivery point, and where he went next. Tom stated he left the area around 10:25, heading south on Jefferson Street to continue deliveries. An officer was sent to verify the statement at Blake's grocery, where the owner confirmed Tom was there on time and left within the log's time frame. But what caught Latham's attention most was Tom's restlessness when asked about children in the area, as if he feared being implicated or worried someone had seen him near the park. When directly asked if he saw any suspicious vehicles near the park, Tom seemed surprised and said he saw nothing except that the area was unusually quiet. There were no contradictions in his statement, but also no objective evidence to fully clear him. Tom became a not enough evidence to charge, but cannot be overlooked. Suspect Bears was entirely different. A homeless man known as Old Murray, around 55 years old, with a scruffy beard, living by collecting cans and doing odd jobs around Market Street. Murray had no fixed residence and often sat at the corner 2 blocks from Jefferson Park. A few residents said that on the morning Lucas disappeared, they glimpsed Murray carrying a large cloth bag passing near the park area, but no one was certain of the time. When police located him in the early afternoon, Murray was sitting next to a dumpster behind an auto repair shop, his face dusty and his eyes seemingly unfocused. Latham ordered Murray brought to the station for questioning. Murray stated he hadn't entered the park that morning and had only been collecting cans along Maple Street. However, his recollection of time was very vague. A homeless person like Murray, who didn't wear a watch or have a fixed schedule, often couldn't provide an accurate timeline. When asked if he saw any child, Murray shook his head. But through his bloodshot eyes from lack of sleep, Latham found it hard to tell if Murray was telling the truth or just afraid of trouble. Objectively, Murray carrying a large cloth bag put him under suspicion, but no one witnessed him approaching children, and there was no indication he owned a vehicle to take Lucas out of town. Murray became a circumstantial suspect, no evidence to charge, nothing to fully exonerate. Suspect T drew the most attention, a man named Richard Rick Dalton, 34 years old, living alone on a street just 5 houses from Jefferson Park. Neighbors described Rick as reclusive, rarely social, often working night shifts at a machine shop, and sometimes driving a light green sedan to work, a detail that quickly made him the focus of suspicion. Police arrived at Rick's home in the late afternoon. Rick answered the door, having just woken from his night shift, with a hoarse voice and slight irritation at being disturbed. When asked about his car, Rick confirmed it was a 1959 Ford Custom Line, light green similar to a Ford Fairlane, but not exactly. Latham requested to see the car, and Rick agreed immediately without objection. The car was parked behind the house, with a thin layer of dust since it hadn't been used since the previous night. Rick said he slept until nearly noon that morning after a long shift and didn't leave the house during the time Lucas disappeared. No one could corroborate this, but there were no signs Rick was lying. When asked if he saw children around the park, Rick said he was sleeping soundly and might not have heard anything. Latham quietly observed Rick's demeanor. Hands steady, breathing even, eyes not avoiding contact. Someone who had just done something terrible often showed signs of stress. But Rick was completely calm, somewhat annoyed at being suspected, but not fearful. Still, living near the park and driving a light green car kept him on the suspect list that couldn't be ignored. When compiling all three investigative paths, Latham saw that all three suspects had gaps in their statements, but none had convincing evidence against them. Tom Harrington had a relatively clear alibi, but not airtight. Murray was too vague on time but had no vehicle. Rick had a car matching the description, but no signs of leaving home during the critical time. None perfectly matched the person who approached Lucas, but none were completely innocent from an investigative standpoint. The only conclusion Latham could reach that day was not enough legal grounds to arrest anyone, but all three must remain on the suspect list. In a child disappearance case, especially in a peaceful town like Ottumwa, that lack of clarity wasn't relief. It was the nightmare. Less than 3 hours after Lucas Perry's name was broadcast county-wide, Ottumwa PD began facing what any child disappearance case typically encounters: a storm of noisy leads, vague information provided in panic, visual misidentifications due to stress, and calls that stretched the town's thin resources in directions that seemed important but ultimately led nowhere. The first lead came from Des Moines, nearly 70 miles west of Ottumwa. Around 1:45 p.m., a gas station attendant on the outskirts of Des Moines called to report that he had just seen a little boy who looked exactly like the one on the radio going into the restroom behind the station with a man. The similarity in description made the information immediately forwarded to Latham. This was the type of report any officer had to treat as top priority, even if the chances were low. Latham immediately radioed the Des Moines police to check it directly. A patrol car was dispatched to the station. They asked the attendant for a more detailed description. When reviewing security footage, the images showed a boy about 7 or 8 years old, light hair, nearly a head taller than Lucas. The boy even turned to look at his father, revealing his face clearly. Not Lucas at all. The important lead turned into a mistake in under 15 minutes. Though he knew such reports were common, Latham still felt precious time being wasted on wrong paths. Not long after, another tip emerged from Keosauqua, a town about 30 miles away. An anonymous call complained that someone had hidden the boy in the barn behind Miller's farm. The man's voice was hoarse, pitch fluctuating, refusing to give a name or further description. When asked how he knew this, the caller hung up immediately. Because the accusation involved a child being hidden, Latham couldn't ignore it. He immediately contacted local police. When officers arrived, Miller's farm was just abandoned land, a barn with a collapsed roof, broken windows, ground scattered with animal tracks. No signs of human activity for months. The chilling silence of the barn only angered the officers more over the irresponsible call, possibly a prank, someone seeking attention, or worse, someone trying to disrupt the investigation. A few hours later, a middle-aged woman came to the police station, insisting she definitely saw a light green Ford Fairlane around 10 a.m. driving on Maple Road south of the park. She spoke confidently, to the point that 2 young officers thought this could be the breakthrough they desperately needed. But when Latham questioned her directly, she couldn't recall the exact license plate, the driver's appearance, or even whether the green was light or dark. After further questioning, she admitted she only thought so because she heard neighbors mention a green car that morning. This led Latham to conclude it was just the effect of spreading information. People think they saw something suspicious because they heard others talk about it. By late afternoon, the noisy leads hadn't stopped. A long-haul trucker stopped at the station, reporting he saw a car similar in color to the one described on the radio. But when questioned further, he said the color could be blue, teal, or gray, depending on light reflection on the road. His description was so vague it was nearly useless. And more importantly, The route he took that morning was completely outside the initial police radar area. Still, Latham noted it and assigned an officer to check, but minutes later received the report, no matching vehicle in the area mentioned. All these tips, when placed together, only frustrated Latham more. The calls poured in, but most were mistakes, faulty memories, or baseless guesses. From travelers, inattentive people, or those who heard it on the radio and interpreted it through memory. Latham realized that more leads didn't mean they were closer to the truth. On the contrary, it was cluttering the main investigation. In the temporary meeting room, he crossed out each report after verification. Boy cited in Des Moines, wrong, anonymous tip, no value. Woman misremembering car unreliable, trucker reporting mismatched color, no location match. And then he wrote in his notebook, vague leads don't help progress. They only cause chaos. As dusk fell, Latham knew the case was entering a dangerous phase. The more people claimed to have seen something, the more vigilant he had to be in distinguishing real from fake in that sea of noise. But until then, all the police had were imaginary shadows, while Lucas remained completely silent and missing. As the clock ticked into the early evening hours, Sergeant Latham requested that all documents collected during the day be transferred to the temporary conference room at the Ottumwa PD headquarters for a thorough review. He had a hunch that amid the sea of vague and chaotic information, important details might have been lost. Not because the kidnapper was overly sophisticated, but because the investigation system itself, which had never before handled a serious child abduction case, had stumbled into its own errors. And just as he feared, when the files, reports, and handwritten notes were spread out across the table, the procedural mistakes began to reveal themselves like red threads pulled askew in a ball of yarn. The first error surfaced when Latham flipped to the statement transcript of a 9-year-old girl who lived in the neighborhood across from Jefferson Park. The transcript had been hastily taken by a young officer around midday, after the girl's parents brought her in at the police's request. In the section describing the stranger, the girl said she saw a man wearing a baseball cap standing near a blue car, and added a crucial detail: he was clutching something in his hand, like a cloth or a glove. Yet the line recorded in the transcript read, "saw nothing in the suspect's hands." A small but chilling discrepancy. In an abduction case, especially with the possibility that the suspect was concealing his face or an object, that detail could completely alter the crime scene reconstruction. Latham called the officer who took the statement in for questioning. The officer admitted that the girl had spoken quickly and it was hard to hear, and he figured it wasn't important. Latham felt the blood rush to his temples, because even one detail altered or omitted could shift the entire investigative picture in the wrong direction. While efforts were made to correct the information, another officer brought in a newly developed black and white photo from a roll taken that morning in Jefferson Park. The image showed a light-colored car traveling on the road north of the park. Though the photo was slightly blurry, the body shape, roof curve, and window design strongly suggested it could be a Ford Fairlane or Custom Line, two models the police were already interested in. The problem was, this photo should have been cross-referenced with the local vehicle registration list as soon as it was obtained. But instead, it had been clipped among administrative paperwork, untouched by anyone. When asked why, the photographing officer explained that he had been assigned too many tasks at once, securing the scene, photographing wind directions, and the bicycle's position, so he planned to check the license plate later, but then forgot. Latham examined the photo under the dim yellow light of the conference room, squinting to make out the plate. But the angle only captured the car's body, while the plate was obscured by glare from the light. No numbers were visible. A potentially critical piece of evidence had been wasted due to lack of standard procedure. As Latham continued reviewing the reports from morning until now, he uncovered more issues. Many reports were submitted with incorrect timestamps or filed in the wrong order. One report noting a call from Des Moines at 2 p.m. had been placed in the 11 a.m. group, leading readers to think Lucas's possible sighting in Des Moines occurred earlier than it actually did. A timing discrepancy that could cause investigators to misjudge feasibility. Another report documenting a long-haul trucker's statement had been grouped with information from the woman who misremembered the car's color, blending two separate leads into a confusing mess. This disorganization wasn't just administrative error, it directly impacted investigative logic. Because if one report was perceived as occurring before another, police would prioritize leads based on that timeline. And in a missing child case, a delay of even 1 hour could render every search step meaningless. But Latham's frustration didn't stop there. When he called the FBI office in Omaha to discuss the case's severity, he received the response he had half expected but still hoped wouldn't come. The Omaha office did not fully agree with Ottumwa PD on classifying this as a likely abduction. One FBI agent said that kids sometimes follow dogs or friends and forget to tell their parents, and that they hadn't seen clear criminal elements to warrant special assistance. Latham spent nearly 20 minutes reiterating the indicators: the abandoned bicycle, footprints abruptly ending, the K-9 unit losing the scent at Highway 34. But Omaha remained cautious, saying they would note it, but couldn't deploy additional resources without more concrete evidence. This infuriated Latham. Agencies that should be supporting each other in the critical early hours were bogged down in hesitation and bureaucracy. The inconsistency in risk assessment delayed tactical decisions, and time, the most insidious enemy in any child abduction, continued to slip away mercilessly. By the time he finished reviewing all the documents from the first day, Latham set down his pen and took a deep breath. The stack of files before him was full of information, but mostly fragmented scraps, inaccurate notes, misordered reports, unanalyzed photos, and a child's statement missing a vital detail. There was no strong evidence, no coherent investigative direction. Instead of getting closer to the truth, the case was being torn into pieces by the chaos of the information itself. And that was when Latham realized what he didn't want to admit: the disappearance of Lucas Perry, rather than being resolved in the golden first hours, was rapidly heading toward a dead end. Not due to a lack of clues, but because the real clues were drowned in the investigation team's own mistakes. By the end of the summer of 1962, as every investigative avenue was worn down by errors, false leads, and the system's own disarray, the Lucas Perry file began showing the first signs of a case that would never find answers anytime soon. Although the Ottumwa PD kept the file open for the next 3 years, fewer and fewer new tips emerged. By February 1965, after hundreds of hours of manual reviews, rechecking scattered statements, and searching every inch of ground around Jefferson Park, the case was officially classified as inactive. Not because the police wanted to give up, but because there was no more data to pursue. The Lucas Perry file was placed in a brown cardboard box, stamped in red pending lead, and stored on a shelf in the basement archives of the Ottumwa Police Department, where light rarely reached. And unsolved cases blended into a layer of dust over time. But even as the file went cold, the years continued to pass. In 1972, a young investigator named Connor Blake was assigned to review unsolved missing persons cases. He reopened Lucas's box, neatly arranged the faded transcripts, and tried to reconstruct the timeline from the scattered pieces left by the previous generation of investigators. But the lack of physical evidence, scientific cross-checking, and consistent records quickly led Blake's efforts to a dead end. He concluded that reopening the case would require new leads from the public, but by year's end, no one had come forward with anything. 1972 closed with a brief report: no progress. The Perry family, having endured a decade of grief, began showing cracks that no one spoke aloud. Donald Perry, the father who always believed his son was still out there somewhere, spent most of his remaining years driving along interstate highways, chasing baseless rumors of a boy seen in this state, or a child resembling Lucas spotted in that town. Each tip led him to familiar scenes of disappointment, strangers who were children, ordinary explanations, and prolonged silence on the drive home. Margaret, in contrast to her husband, could no longer endure those fruitless trips. She turned inward, shrinking into a shadow of the woman who once held her son in warm embraces. She kept Lucas's room exactly as it was for many years, changing the bed sheets each season and placing a new toy on his desk for every birthday. But over all those years, those toys were never touched. In 1983, a new wave of community interest in Ottumwa surged after a television documentary about missing children, prompting dozens of calls to the police demanding the Lucas Perry file be reopened. A special review team was formed to re-examine all the evidence. They also reached out to former investigators for more details, but no one clearly remembered the small particulars, and no one had retained any additional recordings. The already scant physical evidence, footprints, tire tracks from the start, had by then oxidized, warped, and degraded due to poor storage. No forensic data could be extracted. Worse, DNA technology at that time was still in its infancy and not yet used in criminal investigations. The harsh reality was that the Lucas Perry case in 1983 was no different from 1962, except that everyone involved had aged 2 decades. The Ottumwa community repeatedly tried to revive interest, holding prayer vigils, raising funds for missing children searches, and even erecting a small plaque at the entrance to Jefferson Park, inscribed with "Bring Lucas Home." But time has a cruel power. It erodes both patience and memory. With each passing year, fewer people clearly remembered Lucas's face. The children who once played with him grew up, started families, and left town. The older adults who once heard Lucas's laughter were now struggling against old age. In 1993, when the Ottumwa PD conducted a comprehensive file inventory, Lucas's box was brought into the light once more. A team of young investigators tried to reorganize the entire case using new techniques recommended by the FBI, including basic behavioral analysis and statistical patterns of abductions from that era. But they soon realized Lucas's case shared almost no characteristics with any known patterns: too quick, too clean, too few traces. In the summary report, one scribbled sentence stood out as a haunting admission of defeat. No viable investigative direction. Around the same time, the Perry family nearly fell apart completely. Donald died in 1981 from a sudden heart attack, carrying with him the hope and guilt he could never shake. Margaret lived until 1996, quietly in her small home, passing the door to Lucas's bedroom each day like a painful ritual. When she passed, a close neighbor said she had kept the shirt Lucas wore in his last photo, neatly folded and placed under her pillow. Evan, now a grown man, carried the obsession that just because he had gone inside to look for the ball, Lucas's entire life had been torn from its path. He moved out of Iowa years later, trying to build his own life, but whenever he saw a child riding a bike down the street, he would stare longer than necessary. Over nearly half a century, Ottumwa changed. The John Deere factory expanded, old stores closed and reopened under new names. Jefferson Park was rebuilt with metal playground equipment, replacing the wooden one, but the name Lucas Perry became only a distant echo for newer residents. Though the town occasionally recalled the story of the missing boy on anniversaries, most young people knew it only as a sad legend of Ottumwa, a strange tale without resolution, like a shadow fading over time. Those who remembered the case clearly grew old and fewer. And in the cold basement archive room of the police department, the Lucas Perry file box lay untouched for decades, unopened by anyone. There were no more calls of Lucas's name in the park, no more search parties running through the fields, no more urgency of those first hours, only oblivion slowly creeping into every yellowed page, every blurred photo, every handwritten line faded by ink. By 2014, 52 years had passed since that morning of May 14th, and the Lucas Perry case, though never officially closed, had sunk deep into oblivion, as if this small town had been forced to accept that sometimes children vanish from the world without leaving a single traceable mark. While Ottumwa gradually grew accustomed to the silence of a cold case, Lucas's life, now under a completely different name, continued on in a place no one in his family could have imagined. After that fateful morning in 1962, Lucas was no longer Lucas Perry. He became Michael Hayes, a name Raymond Keller made up when he took the boy away from Iowa. From the moment the car door closed, the 6-year-old's life veered onto a path without the sunlight of Jefferson Park or the train whistles from the Ottumwa station. Raymond Keller, the man who abducted him, was not a yelling, violent, or out-of-control criminal, as one might typically imagine. He was quiet, neat, and lived as if always on guard against the world. What was terrifying was precisely that quietness, a silence maintained through habit, slow breathing, and inscrutable eyes that became the atmosphere in which Michael grew up for many years. On the first day after leaving Iowa, the boy was still crying and saying his parents' names, but Raymond only responded with a short sentence, "You're not allowed to mention that anymore." No yelling, no threats, just a reminder, but in a deep, cold voice that made Lucas, a 6-year-old, understand he had to stay silent to be safe. Raymond took him to Missouri, living in an old wooden house on the outskirts of Springfield, where neighbors rarely noticed strangers and children weren't allowed outside without an adult. The house was tucked behind 2 large elm trees, separated from the main road by a wide lawn that held no appeal, no playground, no white fence, no sounds of children. Only the wind whistling through the tin roof and the distant rumble of passing trucks. Raymond changed his name on the first day home. From today, you're Michael, you're my son. Understand? Lucas didn't really understand, but fear made him nod. There weren't many toys, a few old marbles, a second-hand comic book from a thrift store, and a toy truck missing a wheel. What Raymond cared about most wasn't caring for the boy like a child, but keeping him hidden. He never took Michael to school, never let him play outside alone, and never allowed contact with strangers. When neighbors asked why they never saw the boy in town, Raymond said his son had respiratory issues, was prone to colds, and had to stay indoors. Michael lived in that narrow world for many years, and since no one asked serious questions, his existence slipped past the community's eyes like a faint shadow. Michael remembered very little about Iowa. His earliest memories faded over time like wiping a chalk drawing with a sleeve. He remembered a park with red-painted wooden swings, but not the name. He remembered someone calling him son, but wasn't sure if it was his mother's voice or just an illusion created by longing for Margaret's warm embrace. He had fragmented dreams, images of small shoes caked in dirt, sunlight filtering through maple leaves, and a paved path where whenever he tried to walk further in the dream, the scene shifted to a dark space, the wooden house with Raymond. Those dreams would wake Michael in the middle of the night, panicked and unsure what was real memory and what was the product of a child's mind clinging to something erased too early from his life. Raymond never beat Michael, nor did he try to play the role of a loving father. He only supervised meals, sleep times, footsteps, windows, and even the questions Michael dared to ask about the outside world. "The outside is dangerous," Raymond would say, whenever Michael asked why he couldn't go out. "People will hurt you. You're only safe here." A child raised in fear will accept the simplest explanation, as long as it makes him feel he exists. So Michael believed, and Michael grew up. Around age 10, he started finding it strange that there were no real birthdays, no school, no friends, no doctor visits, just Raymond and the wooden walls. But that strangeness wasn't strong enough to make him fully doubt. Michael remained a child isolated from the world, raised on warnings about invisible dangers beyond the front door. At 14, Michael saw his medical record for the first time, a simple sheet reading Hayes, Michael, born in St. Louis, Missouri, 1958. He stared at the year 1958 for a long time. It felt wrong, as if his body didn't match that birth year, as if his childhood had been shortened or extended, depending on what Raymond wanted to say. But he didn't dare ask. The biggest questions in his life were always swallowed back down his throat. As Michael entered his teenage years, Raymond controlled him even more tightly. He feared that Michael's voice, height, and appearance would make someone realize he wasn't his biological son. So Michael was only allowed out in the car, windows closed, and only to places Raymond trusted no one would notice: small gas stations, auto repair shops, or back dirt roads outside town. Michael didn't know where Iowa was on a map. He only knew that from when his clear memories began, he had lived in a small corner of Missouri. But sometimes, when seeing distant hills or hearing a train whistle through the night, Michael felt his chest tighten. A familiar, sweet yet painful sensation, as if part of his body was trying to name a place his mind no longer recognized. Raymond never explained Michael's true origins to him. He just lived, silently, keeping the boy by his side like a possession. Michael grew up in that emptiness, a life with nothing remarkable but full of quiet suspicion, like a room where light sometimes seeps in, only to reveal more shadows than before. By the time he reached young adulthood, Michael had learned to hide his vague memories of Iowa in the darkest corner of his mind. Like old boxes pushed to the back of an attic, no one wanted to open them anymore. But memories, like light, always find cracks to slip through, and Michael's life under the name Hayes continued in that false quiet, with no one knowing he had once been the child who vanished from America's map. The child an entire town and family had searched for over decades, while he remembered them only as distorted images worn away by time. When Michael turned 19, that silence began to crack. The scattered fragments he had once tried to bury suddenly shifted in a quiet but powerful way, not because of grand memories, but due to tiny details that seemed almost harmless. It all started with a simple health checkup at the town clinic, where the doctor requested Michael's vaccination records and medical history. Raymond handed him an old envelope, its edges frayed and crumbling, containing just 2 crumpled sheets, a vaccination card with no clear dates, and a handwritten medical summary filled with glaring gaps that anyone would find odd. The doctor frowned longer than usual, flipping through them as if searching for something overlooked. "Why is the record so thin?" he asked Raymond. "We usually keep more." Raymond replied in his familiar low voice, calm enough that no one pressed further. "The kid was sickly. I kept him home a lot." No regular family doctor, but Michael, for the first time in his life, caught a flicker of unease in the doctor's eyes, as if that answer didn't quite add up. He didn't speak up, but the feeling lingered in his mind all day, like a small needle pricking a spot he'd always avoided touching. A few months later, when applying for a part-time job at an auto repair shop, Michael needed a copy of his birth certificate. Raymond gave him a thin sheet, the ink faded, barely retaining the original form's borders. Even stranger, the place of birth only listed Missouri, with no specific city, and the mother's name section was blank. When Michael asked, Raymond simply said, "You were born in a small place. Your mom passed early. Paperwork was rushed." But when he showed that birth certificate to the shop manager, the guy clicked his tongue. "That's weird. I've never seen one missing so much info." Those words, though casual, stirred up an undercurrent in Michael, an old feeling from childhood, when he'd dream of Iowa without knowing what it was. As he grew older, he heard more similar comments, to the point where he couldn't ignore them. Whenever he went out with Raymond, people would often drop a polite remark. "You don't look much like your dad, huh? Or your hair's so light, doesn't resemble Mr. Keller at all." When Michael was 14, a mechanic who worked with Raymond once joked, "Him looking like you? I bet his mom was foreign or something." Raymond responded with a calm smile, but afterward gripped Michael's shoulder a bit too hard. A brief moment, but enough to remind him to stay quiet. Michael didn't dare ask. He just noted it. But by age 20, those comments started resonating like background music he couldn't turn off. No one resembled Raymond, from hair color to jawline to eyes. When looking in the mirror, Michael saw his own light brown eyes, a shade unlike any Keller relative he'd ever heard mentioned, and he couldn't explain the mismatch. Then one time, an old neighbor casually saw Michael and joked, "I swear you look more like someone from out of state than a Missouri local." That offhand remark left Michael frozen. The older he got, the more he felt an invisible distance between himself and the life Raymond had assigned him. It wasn't just the unusually thin medical records, the vague birth certificate, or the comments. It was also the fact that he had no baby photos at all. One day, while cleaning out an old cabinet, Michael asked Raymond, "Do you have any pictures of me as a baby?" Raymond just said, "Everything got lost in the move." But that answer didn't explain why there wasn't a single item in the house evoking a newborn, no old blanket, no first toy, no tiny shoes or milk tooth box that families usually keep. That complete absence, piled onto the other scattered details, became a void that Michael started feeling himself standing on the edge of. He remembered his childhood dreams, colors, sounds, and atmospheres he couldn't name. Those memories were like reflections on water, familiar yet distant. When he tried to touch them, they dissolved. But when he turned away, they reappeared, lurking at the edge of his subconscious. By then, Michael could no longer ignore the sense that his life was missing a crucial part, a part erased so cleanly that the very cleanliness became a clue. All the small gaps, vague answers, outsiders' glances, incomplete paperwork, they all wove together into a doubt he couldn't name. That perhaps his life hadn't started in Missouri like Raymond always said. That before being Michael Hayes, he might have been someone else. But who, Michael couldn't know. He only felt that something bigger was waiting to be revealed, like a door behind his memories always locked shut, needing just a sliver of light to open. When he turned 32, Michael, still carrying the name Hayes that Raymond had imposed, had a relatively stable life compared to his suppressed childhood. He worked as a mechanic at a small garage in Springfield, married a kind-hearted woman named Karen, and had a firstborn daughter. Becoming a father steered his life in a new direction. He wanted to protect his child, to care for her better than anything he'd known in his own childhood. But that very moment deepened the cracks in his identity, cracks he couldn't fill with busyness, responsibility, or love for his daughter. When Karen handed him the pediatric hospital's medical history form, requiring family medical history, Michael held the pen but couldn't write anything. He stared at the blank page, looking at the section for genetic history from biological parents, then down to recorded conditions from infancy, feeling an eerie emptiness. He scribbled a few words, then erased them, wrote again, then erased. He knew nothing about his family beyond the vague responses Raymond had given. Answers Michael had tried to believe because he had no other choice. When Karen asked, "Does anyone in your family have heart disease?" Michael hesitated too long. "I don't know. What about autoimmune diseases? Allergies? History of asthma?" "I don't know." Karen thought he was just forgetting, or that Raymond wasn't the sharing type. But for Michael, each question was like a knife touching the truth he'd always avoided. No clear vaccination records, no recorded newborn exams, no genetic info, nothing that a normal child would carry from birth. Karen seemed puzzled, but Michael felt something cold run down his spine. Could his entire life be a void built on lies? Then, not long after, another incident happened. Random, but enough to shake the fragile beliefs he still held. When Michael updated his info at work, HR reported that his Social Security number didn't match in some fields. At first, he thought it was a typo. But when they rechecked the national system, the issue persisted. The system flagged, valid SSN, but no original issuance record. This shouldn't happen normally. Every Social Security number is issued at birth or when parents register. Some even have regional codes reflecting the birthplace. But for Michael, the data was blank, no links, no issuance info, no initial address, nothing before 1975. The year he supposedly would have been 17. The HR rep even said, "This is really strange. Your record looks like it was created years later than your stated birth date." Michael froze. He asked, "What do you mean?" The guy replied bluntly, "It's like you didn't exist before age 10. Those words hit Michael in the chest like a blow. Didn't exist before 10? He remembered growing up in Raymond's wooden house, but memories before that, just fragments. He recalled the feel of wind through the wooden door, the smell of old paint, evenings when Raymond sat alone in the dark. But before that, before Missouri, he had nothing but flashes and dreams. Maple trees, lawns, church bells, and the eyes of a woman he couldn't name. Those memories had never been coherent, but they'd never vanished. Now they returned stronger, clearer, as if waiting for this moment to surface. That night, when he got home, Karen asked why he looked so restless, but Michael didn't answer. He just sat silently at the kitchen table, staring at the faded birth certificate Raymond had given him. For the first time, Michael noticed things he'd overlooked. The form's serial number didn't match the issuance year. The stamp was blurry, off-center, and unlike samples Karen showed him for comparison. And most notably, the registrar's signature didn't match the real one he found in public county records. The small inconsistencies scattered over years now stacked into a suffocating wall. Michael couldn't escape what he'd long suspected, but never dared face. Perhaps the identity he'd carried for nearly 3 decades was fake. Perhaps his life had been rewritten from scratch, and perhaps the lack of memories wasn't forgetfulness, but a past stolen from him. For the first time, Michael looked in the mirror and felt unfamiliar, as if the person staring back wasn't him, as if another name was waiting to be called, and the question he'd always feared suddenly became impossible to ignore. If he wasn't Michael Hayes, then who was he? When the questions about his identity grew too big to keep ignoring, Michael started seeking answers the way someone in the modern era could. He turned to technology. In 2014, as commercial DNA tests became popular, Michael heard a coworker at the garage mention that 23andMe could determine ancestry, genetic diseases, even connect distant relatives. Those words stuck to him like a spark on dry tinder he'd carried inside for years. One weekend night, after Karen and their daughter were asleep, Michael sat at the computer, opened the 23andMe site, and for the first time actively confronted his own doubts. He didn't tell Karen, fearing that what he was about to do might shatter what he called his real life. He ordered the kit, received the box days later, and followed the instructions: rinse mouth, spit sample, seal, send, just that. But Michael felt like he'd signed a door opening to the past, a door Raymond had locked for half a century. 6 weeks later, the email from 23andMe arrived. Michael opened it, hands shaking so much he had to set his glass down to avoid spilling. The first report he saw wasn't health risks or traits, but the ancestry map: 87% Northern European, 9% Scandinavian, 4% unknown cluster. But what left him stunned was the small line below: genetic clusters strongly associated with Iowa, USA. Iowa, the word squeezed his heart. He had no connection to Iowa, had never been there. Raymond had never mentioned it. A state he only knew from old articles, corn farms, and a vague feeling about maples, like the images in his childhood dreams. Scrolling to DNA relatives, Michael could barely breathe. The top match: possible second cousin, Sarah Boone. Estimated shared DNA, 4.6%. He didn't know Sarah, but the name Boone rang with an inexplicable familiarity, as if he'd heard it somewhere but couldn't place it. After 2 days of hesitation, Michael sent a direct message through the site's system. "Hi Sarah, I just got my DNA results, and it says we might be second cousins. I'm not sure if this is accurate, but I'm trying to learn more about my family. If you know anything about the Boone side, I'd appreciate it." Sarah replied surprisingly fast. "I do. My family has many branches in Iowa. Do you have more info?" When Michael said he was born in Missouri, but had little parent records, Sarah's tone shifted. "My family had a relative who was a cop in Ottumwa. His name was Wallace Boone. He worked on a big child abduction case in Iowa, back in the 60s. Are you sure you have no Iowa ties?" Reading that, Michael felt the ground drop out. He couldn't explain why the question chilled him so much. He didn't know Wallace Boone, Ottumwa, anything Iowa-related, at least not in his memory. But his body reacted to Ottumwa like an uncontrollable jolt. Sarah, an amateur genealogist, offered, "Want me to try building a family tree? DNA doesn't usually lie." Michael hesitated long, but finally agreed. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah accessed public databases, connecting Boone, Perry, McAllister branches, old lines from Wapello County. When she found the closest DNA branch matching Michael, Sarah sent a long message, one Michael had to reread many times to grasp. It said, "Michael, you're closely related to the Perry line in Ottumwa. A child with the Perry surname went missing in 1962. The boy's name was Lucas. Michael felt his ears ring. That name, Lucas, hit him like a sound both strange and familiar, like a call from the bottom of a memory lake he'd tried to cover. He didn't remember anyone named Lucas, but in childhood dreams, he'd heard someone call honey, in a tone that now seemed close to that name. Sarah sent more. I cross-checked your DNA with living Perrys. The match is abnormally high. No way there's no connection. I think you should know this isn't an error. All DNA branches lead to the Perry family. Michael took nearly a minute to reply. What do you mean? Who might I be? Sarah just wrote. I'm not certain. But if you were born 1956, 1958, and your records lack original data, it's very likely you're that missing child. 1 heartbeat. Then 2. Michael felt weightless, but his heart raced, as if his body couldn't handle so much truth at once. He recalled the faded birth certificate, empty medical records, mismatched SSN, vague memories of leaves and train whistles. All the scattered pieces suddenly formed a horrifyingly clear picture. DNA, the technology unimaginable in his childhood, was telling him he wasn't Michael Hayes. And for the first time, he understood, perhaps, before being Michael, he had been Lucas Perry. When the DNA information from 23andMe began flowing into federal databases for automated cross-verification, it triggered an unusual chain of genetic matches. A living person's DNA sample matched the Perry family lineage, which was tied to the longest unresolved missing child case in Wapello County's history. The internal alert from the forensic system sent to the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation carried no conclusions, but it was enough to make Special Agent Joel Bradford, the man who had handled Iowa's cold cases for 12 years, pause in the middle of a meeting, open his laptop, and stare at a single line. Possible biological match to Lucas Perry, missing since 1962. Bradford, known for his cool demeanor and rarely rattled by any case, fell silent for a long time. He had reviewed the Lucas Perry file years earlier while going through the cold case list, but back then, the technology wasn't advanced enough to do anything with it. The disappearance had happened too quickly, too cleanly, with almost no biological evidence left behind. But now, DNA from an adult man living in Missouri was suggesting that the 6-year-old boy who vanished in 1962 might still be alive. Bradford immediately requested the original case files, and the old brown cardboard box that had passed through the hands of dozens of investigators before fading into obscurity was pulled up from the basement archives. Yellowed papers, slanted handwritten reports, faded black and white photos, all stacked together like a long sigh from the past. But Bradford wasn't the type to accept age as a limitation. He sent the entire file to the digitization unit, ordering every page, every corner, every photo to be scanned, then uploaded to DCI's modern analysis system, where artificial intelligence helped reconstruct old data into a 3D timeline model. Just hours later, a digital recreation of Jefferson Park in 1962 appeared. The location of the bicycle, the distance to the fence, the direction of sunlight, the positions of witnesses, everything rebuilt with a precision that investigators in 1962 couldn't have imagined. Bradford rotated the model, peeled back data layers, compared the child's footprints to the suspected vehicle's direction, and realized the abductor's approach was highly logical. A short curve from the north entrance, turning toward the trail leading to Highway 34. This was something police at the time had sensed but couldn't prove with their tools. Now, the 3D model showed it clearly. Less than 20-25 seconds would have been enough to lift the child into the vehicle and leave the park unnoticed. From that model, Bradford ordered reanalysis of physical evidence using new technology. The child's shoe prints were rephotographed with ultra-high-resolution cameras compared to children's shoe models produced between 1958 and 1962, cross-referencing wear patterns and sizes. The results showed the prints matched the shoe size of a 6-year-old Midwestern American child from that era. But the interesting part was the uneven wear bias toward the left side, like a child who leaned on that foot when running. A detail Lucas's mother had mentioned in his personal file. Lucas tended to tilt his left foot when running because of a minor old injury. That small detail, once completely overlooked, now became one of the strongest pieces of evidence confirming the footprints truly belonged to Lucas. Bradford continued by compiling a list of surviving witnesses. Evan Perry, Lucas's older brother, was now over 60 and living in Montana. A 9-year-old girl who gave a statement in 1962 was now a 60-year-old woman, and some former residents of Maple Street were still scattered around the state. Bradford called each one, requesting re-interviews via video or in person. The goal wasn't to find new statements, but to use their memories to validate details suggested by the technology. When speaking with the woman who had seen the man in the baseball cap, Bradford noticed her description of his stance and the vehicle's position nearly perfectly matched the 3D reconstruction. Though memories had faded, those accurate points helped eliminate inconsistencies in the old reports. From there, Bradford moved to the bigger task, verifying the original suspect route, especially the light blue Ford Fairlane witnesses had seen. He requested Iowa's 1962 DMV records, something local police at the time couldn't fully access due to technological limits. The massive dataset was retrieved from state archives, digitized, and filtered by vehicle color, registration area, and model. The number surprised Bradford. Within a 20-mile radius of Ottumwa in 1962, only 8 light blue Ford Fairlanes or custom lines were registered. From those 8, he eliminated 6 because the owners were elderly women or families with young children present that morning. 2 remained. One belonged to a man who moved out of state in 1964 and had since passed away. The other registered to Raymond Keller. A jolt hit Bradford's chest instantly. He requested the FBI to pull Keller's file. Keller's record was brief, had lived in Missouri, died in 1998 of heart disease, no violent criminal history, no psychiatric records, worked as a welder in his younger years. Someone like that wouldn't appear on any criminal radar, but what caught Bradford's eye was the note. Multiple address changes from 1962, 1965. No stable employment history. For an abduction case, frequent moves were an extremely significant red flag. Bradford requested Keller's old Missouri addresses. One matched the area where Michael Hayes had lived as a child. A coincidence too big to ignore. From that moment, Bradford understood he wasn't just reviewing an old missing person file, he was facing a case that had never been examined through 21st century technology, and the pieces were starting to fit together, not because of anyone's memory, but because of data, DNA, and a truth buried for over half a century rising from the shadows. As soon as the case files, old witness interview transcripts, and DMV history were organized, Special Agent Joel Bradford decided the most critical next step was to validate the biological evidence. He requested that Michael Hayes provide a new DNA sample sent directly to the FBI lab at Quantico, renowned for handling the most complex DNA in cold case history. The sample was taken from Michael's oral mucosal cells, carefully packaged, along with old items from the Perry family that Margaret Perry had kept, a wrinkled baby shirt, a few old socks, and a surviving paper photo from Lucas's bedroom when he disappeared. Everything was shipped securely with full chain of custody documentation, ensuring legal validity for an identity verification that could lead to historic results. Throughout the analysis, Quantico experts used advanced STR technology and enhanced Cascadia's methods to extract DNA markers and compare them to the Perry family profiles preserved from the 1970s, including samples from hair, nails, and personal items left by Donald and Margaret Perry. The process took weeks, requiring meticulous attention to every gene sequence, identifying each allele, and cross-referencing with extremely high match probabilities. When the final results were sent back to Iowa DCI, Bradford and the team sat in front of the computer, eyes glued to the screen, as each character and number gradually increased their heart rates. The results showed not just one, but all STR loci matched perfectly with the Perry family sample, clearly confirming that Michael Hayes was the biological son of Donald and Margaret Perry. The match probability was 99.9999%, far exceeding the legal threshold for recognizing parent-child relationship. Bradford called Michael to the office, explaining the results in a low, deliberate voice. "Michael, we just received the results from Quantico. The DNA shows you are Lucas Perry, the 6-year-old boy who went missing in 1962. Michael felt the room spin, vague memories, childhood dreams, all the hazy signs pointing to Iowa suddenly becoming clear. From the bicycle by the fence, sunlight through the leaves, to the sound of his brother Evan calling his name from over half a century ago, everything flowed back continuously. Agent Bradford looked at Michael and emphasized, "You need to prepare to reunite with your family, people who have been waiting for you for 52 years. This is the final confirmation. There is no doubt left." Michael stood silently, overwhelmed by complex emotions, shock, joy, fear, and long-suppressed pain pulsing with every heartbeat. Part of him still couldn't believe the 6-year-old torn from his family had survived out there as an adult man. But the numbers on the DNA report didn't lie. Michael Hayes and Lucas Perry were one and the same. Agent Bradford continued guiding the next procedures, explaining the official reporting process, but it all blurred in Michael's vision as he finally understood that his entire life, every doubt and gap in his history, now had a clear answer. That moment, without needing more words, fully confirmed his identity and opened the door to the reunion, the Perry family, and Michael had awaited for over half a century. Around mid-morning, Evan Perry's phone rang, the calm but urgent tone from Iowa DCI, immediately making him sense this call was unlike any ordinary one. Evan, 61 years old, having endured the pain of losing his little brother over half a century ago, stood frozen in the living room of his old Montana home, hand trembling as he gripped the worn wooden table. The caller, Special Agent Joel Bradford, began summarizing slowly and carefully, stressing that the information needed to be absorbed step by step to minimize psychological shock. Bradford explained that a DNA result just confirmed at FBI Quantico matched perfectly with the Perry family sample, showing that Michael Hayes, the adult man Evan had only known through vague letters and his parents' stories, was Lucas Perry, his brother missing since 1962. Evan listened to every word, his mind reeling, heart pounding, throat dry. Initially, his reaction was complete collapse, eyes red, limbs numb, body shaking uncontrollably. In that moment, all the years of waiting, faint hope, disappointment, and pain piled up, overwhelming him in seconds. After a while, Evan began to feel a new thread of hope emerging. This truly was his brother, the one pulled from their world for over half a century. Confusion mixed with indescribable joy, as he didn't know how to react, wanting to shout and cry, until there were no tears left. Bradford gently guided Evan on the next steps, emphasizing that the first meeting would follow standard criminal psychology protocols to avoid excessive shock. They would meet Michael in a private room with psychological support staff present, every detail about the environment, lighting, and distance calculated to ensure Evan could process it without overload. Bradford also noted that everything would be tightly controlled, no media presence, no recording, only directly involved parties allowed. Evan felt a small relief. Finally, after over 5 decades struggling with cold files, checking maps countless times, fragmented memories of Jefferson Park, and those spring mornings in 1962, the truth was confirmed. He sighed, closed his eyes, then opened them to remind himself he needed to prepare mentally to face the brother he thought was lost forever. Bradford advised Evan to stay calm, avoid rushing judgments, and suggested writing down all questions, feelings, and memories of Lucas before the reunion to help make the meeting complete and psychologically safe. The entire call, from when Evan answered to when it ended, lasted about 15 minutes, but every second was heavy, encapsulating complex emotions, collapse, hope, confusion, and a slow mental preparation for what was coming. Evan sat in his armchair, hands on his knees, looking out the window where morning light filtered through maple leaves, and for the first time in over 5 decades, his sense of loss blended with the belief that his brother was finally still alive, a truth that both affirmed identity and unleashed a flood of emotions Evan had never known how to handle, but also the first step toward preparing for the momentous meeting he never imagined would happen in his lifetime. Morning at the Des Moines DCI, soft light filtered through the large glass windows, bringing a sense of calm that contrasted sharply with the storm of emotions Evan Perry had just endured. In the temporary meeting room specially arranged to criminal psychology standards, Michael Hayes entered, carrying the posture of a mature man, but with eyes mixed with confusion and curiosity, while Evan Perry stood waiting, hands trembling slightly, but eyes shining brightly, ready to reunite with his younger brother after more than half a century. The moment Michael approached, both paused for a long second, as if trying to see through each other, searching for familiar signs in the other's face. The thin scar on Michael's forehead, which Raymond had once called a minor childhood accident, made Evan choke up. It matched the memory of that morning in Jefferson Park, when Lucas slipped and Evan reached out to catch him. Michael noticed his brother's hand lifting, startled by the familiar feeling in the gesture, a small habit he once remembered. Evan always used his right hand to adjust hair or pull down a cap for the little boy. Those small details, the scar, the way of shaking the head, the way of looking, became bridges connecting the fragmented memories Michael had kept hidden in his mind. They brought vague memories of Iowa suddenly back to life. Images of Jefferson Park, sunlight piercing through the foliage, the sound of birds singing in the morning, the cold chill on the wooden bench, Evan's voice calling the name Lucas, and the lingering smell of mud after a night rain. That feeling overwhelmed Michael, as if the half-life he had lived under the name Michael Hayes was suddenly reconnected to the childhood that had been torn away. Evan spoke first, voice low but trembling. "Lucas, I can't believe I'm standing in front of you." Michael took a deep breath, eyes blurring. "Brother, I don't know what to say either, but I remember," the last words trailing off in a soft sob. This moment lasted a full minute, but everything unfolded as if in slow motion, every detail etched in memory, every action becoming a living recollection. The surviving family members, Aunt Helen, 2 cousins, and a few old neighbors, invited to witness, stood around, eyes tearing up, observing every gesture, every glance, every tone of voice. Each smile, each nod or bow, carried echoes of memories, thought lost forever. Michael emphasized a small detail he still remembered from his Iowa days: the way Evan often placed a hand on his shoulder when they rode bikes together, the way their father taught him to ride straight and not fall, and the smell of Margaret's baking as she prepared breakfast. Things that seemed trivial now became emotional biological markers. They appeared in no records, no one could measure them, but for Michael and Evan, they were vivid truths, confirming that this was indeed each other. The procedures followed psychological standards. Bradford maintained a safe distance, guiding the introduction of each family member, adjusting lighting and sound to avoid overwhelming emotions. Michael sat down. Evan stepped closer, hand lightly touching his brother's shoulder, a gesture full of intimacy, but also containing worry and caution, letting everything unfold naturally. Michael whispered short phrases about faint memories. Misty mornings on the grass of Jefferson Park, the sound of train whistles, the image of a red bicycle leaning against the fence. Evan listened, eyes tearing up, each small detail bringing back recollections of interrupted moments the entire family had waited for over 53 years. When the reunion ended, media were allowed into the meeting room under strict limitations, only familiar reporters, with cameras pre-positioned and microphones controlled, to document the story without pressuring the family. They took the first photos, captured a few short statements, but all important actions and words occurred in front of Bradford, who supervised and ensured Michael and Evan could interact naturally, without interruption. Reporters noted the confused but hopeful expression on Michael's face, the trembling but sincere voice as he repeated his old name. "I am Lucas Perry." Every gesture, every sound was like a living record of the historic event, a child missing for more than half a century, finally confirmed alive, reuniting with blood relatives, and rekindling memories thought completely lost. As the morning light slanted through the window, illuminating Evan's graying hair and Michael's dark brown hair, the entire room fell silent in the moment of recognition. A harmony between past and present, between loss and reunion. This was the first time in 53 years that fragmented memories, habits, scars, and sensations, thought dormant, were reassembled completely in a living scene, confirming that Lucas Perry had returned to his family, that children taken away could, somehow, return to the world that had abandoned them. After the reunion between Lucas Perry and his family took place, Special Agent Joel Bradford shifted focus to analyzing the abductor who had taken the boy from Ottumwa in 1962. Raymond Keller. Although Keller had died in 1998, his records were still retained by various state and federal agencies, including court reports, vital records and documents from Missouri Social Services. Bradford began with legal records. Keller had been stripped of custody rights in a divorce in the 1950s, after the court determined he was unfit to care for his children. Documents noted that from 1960 to the mid-1960s, Keller moved frequently, from Missouri to Iowa and back to Missouri, sometimes staying in short-term rentals, leaving no long-term trace. This constant relocation suggested Keller was always trying to avoid detection, but it also made him hard to place on suspect lists for child disappearances at the time. Bradford then contacted Keller's old neighbors, some now retired or living in other states, for information. One neighbor recounted that Keller used to watch children in the area, often standing by the road in the mornings and afternoons, observing kids going to school or playing in nearby yards, but never approaching directly or causing any incidents. An elderly woman remembered Keller asking about school start and end times, as well as the route students took near his home, which Bradford later assessed as intentional stalking behavior, though without specific evidence of abduction. Next, Bradford and his team decided to search Keller's former properties, which had been cleared and transferred to new owners since his death. Though most belongings had been dispersed, some items remained in his last wooden house, including personal records, handwritten journals, some correspondence, and a few personal effects. The investigation team reviewed all papers, searching for signs related to Lucas or any activity involving other children. They found a few notes about observing roads around the park, places Keller often walked, but no information directly mentioning the abduction, no evidence of clear motive or any recorded plan. Some personal journals contained entries about loneliness, the sense of losing his children, and anger toward the world, but nothing could be directly linked to criminal acts. Bradford analyzed every detail meticulously, comparing places Keller lived, movements between states, and any interactions with children from old records. He concluded that Keller had a pattern of observation, constant relocation, and ability to conceal activities, but left no clear signs of motive, no evidence he planned the abduction in advance. And the unusual behaviors reported by neighbors were insufficient to determine why he targeted Lucas. Nevertheless, the overlaps in location, timing of living near Ottumwa, and ownership of a light blue Ford Fairlane at the time of Lucas's disappearance created a fairly detailed profile of the likelihood that Keller was the abductor. Bradford noted that, despite the unclear motive and Keller's death, analyzing observation behaviors, constant interstate movement, and personal details still helped build a relatively comprehensive psychological profile, explaining how he could approach and take Lucas without detection, while also accounting for why, over more than half a century, the boy could live in hiding without discovery, creating a clearer picture of the abductor's behavior that previous investigations lacked with modern technology. Though every step in the modern investigation had confirmed Lucas Perry's identity and revealed many details about the abduction, countless questions still hung unanswered that investigators, including Bradford, could not definitively resolve, and those questions formed a layer of shadow enveloping the entire case. The first thing that haunted anyone reviewing the file was the question, why did Raymond Keller, a man who lived isolated and had no connection to the Perry family, know the boy's exact name? There were no records in old files, no contact with Ottumwa PD before the disappearance, and no evidence Keller ever met Donald or Margaret Perry. Did Keller overhear Lucas's name from neighbors, a coincidence, or had he been stalking the Perry family beforehand? No one knows. The second question, who was the man in the baseball cap that Evan and the 11-year-old witness saw that morning? Descriptions were distant, vague, and memories had faded, making confirmation impossible. It could have been Keller, but it might also have been a random passerby appearing at the critical moment, or even an undiscovered accomplice. The light blue Ford Fairlane, confirmed by both witnesses and DMV records as linked to Keller, was another open question. Was the car used exactly as witnesses described, or did Keller change vehicles during the case period? And who was the driver seen that morning? No documents confirm Keller actually drove it at the time of Lucas's disappearance. Everything relies on probability and timing color matches. Additionally, the moment Duke, the canine dog, lost the scent near Highway 34 remains an unsolved mystery. Latham and Bradford both agreed this indicated Lucas was taken by motor vehicle, but why did the trail vanish abruptly? Was the scent masked by terrain, wind, or human intervention, like Keller switching cars or jumping into another vehicle? No one knows for sure. Each question opened more questions, forming a dense circle of mystery. The critical moments of Lucas's disappearance, events witnesses only glimpsed, details about the abductor no one knew. There were no photos, no videos, no legal evidence to provide definitive answers for those moments. Even when Keller's records were exploited, journals, letters, and personal documents only contained vague entries, descriptions of loneliness, and personal frustration, without explaining why he targeted Lucas. These questions not only challenged investigators, but also forced the Perry family and Michael to accept a portion of truth they could never fully grasp, a part of memory forever unclear. Details like the name, the car, the fleeting figure, all still hung in the investigative space like unanswered question marks, reminding that in every case, no matter how modern technology can confirm DNA or identity, mysteries always remain created by time, people, and chance. And those mysteries make the Lucas Perry case one, where identity has been decoded, but layers of shadow remain untouched by the light of truth. When all the steps of the modern investigation came to a close, and Lucas Perry's identity was confirmed after more than half a century, his story did not simply end with a missing child finally returning to his family. It also opened a new chapter for investigative work in Iowa and across the United States, where genetic genealogy had proven its ability to solve cases that traditional methods could not. This technology allowed investigators to connect scattered DNA strands, seemingly meaningless clues, and dusty old records to reconstruct a biological and family history map, creating opportunities to uncover the truth in cases thought to be forever lost. In Iowa, the Lucas Perry case became a symbol of the power that modern science brings, encouraging cold case units to apply genetic genealogy in searching for long-missing victims while raising community awareness about the importance of preserving records, evidence, and genetic information. Meanwhile, Lucas, after completing all administrative procedures and identity verification, returned to Ottumwa to visit the graves of his parents, Donald and Margaret Perry, people who were no longer alive to witness the reunion they had hoped for over more than 50 years. He stood before the gravestones, hands clasped, eyes closed, and whispered, "I'm home. I am Lucas Perry." Those words were not only a confirmation of identity, but also a spiritual release for himself, for his parents' memory, and for all the days of waiting and hope stretched across half a century. From Lucas's story, investigative agencies drew important lessons about the value of perseverance, the preservation and re-examination of evidence, and the potential of modern science to deliver justice in cases that seem to have no way out. The legacy of the case is not just that a missing person was found, but also a shift in how the world views cold cases, the use of genetic genealogy as a powerful tool in solving crimes, and a reminder to the community that no one, even a child kidnapped decades ago, is truly forgotten if truth and patience are maintained. Ending the story, the afternoon light filtered through the rows of trees in the Ottumwa cemetery, shining on the moss-covered gravestones, as if to emphasize that although time may pass, pain, hope, and truth always exist side by side, and sometimes, what seems lost forever can still be found. As long as people continue to strive and never abandon faith in justice and family love. This is the final, humane message that closes a journey of more than half a century filled with loss, doubt, and ultimately the affirmation that truth and hope, even when buried for decades, can always return to reconnect scattered lives, bringing a lost Lucas Perry back to his family and his roots. The story of Lucas Perry, a 6-year-old boy kidnapped and found after more than half a century, is not just a cold case decoded thanks to genetic genealogy. It also brings profound lessons about child protection, the value of patience, and the importance of community in modern life in the United States. In the story, we clearly see that the Perry family initially believed Ottumwa was a safe place, allowing Lucas to play alone, but in one moment of carelessness, combined with the appearance of Raymond Keller, a strange man, it led to a tragedy that lasted 53 years. This emphasizes that in any community today, even when children live in peaceful environments, parents still need to supervise carefully, establish clear rules, and teach children how to recognize danger from strangers. The story also highlights the importance of preserving records, medical documents, birth certificates, and all identifying marks for children, because those very records became the key to connecting Lucas to his family through DNA. Additionally, the modern investigative process and the patience of Special Agent Bradford remind us that in today's world, accurately storing information, closely coordinating between agencies, and persistently pursuing the truth can make a big difference, not only in legal terms, but also in protecting people. Another lesson is the value of community. Old witnesses, neighbors, distant relatives, all contributed to the turning point for Lucas. Therefore, advice for families in the United States today is to always maintain close ties with the community, educate children about risks, keep complete personal records, and never assume a familiar environment is absolutely safe. Lucas Perry's story is clear evidence that preparation, careful observation, and cooperation between family, community, and investigative agencies can save lives or restore justice, even after many decades. If you believe that justice and truth can always be found, no matter how much time has passed, please subscribe to the channel to join us in continuing the journey of exploring cases that seem to have been forgotten. Thank you for following the story of Lucas Perry. See you in the next video, where another mystery of America will be revealed.